I go by she, her. Sorry, I go by she, her, aya pronouns. And I'm a student design fellow.
Amazing. Caroline, we'll go to you next.
Hi, my name is Caroline Leonard, and I am one of the Newman Civic Engagement Fellows for this year. I'm a senior at the University of Mississippi, and I am also, my pronouns are she, her, and I am one of the Newman mini grant recipients for my project, Oxford Lafayette Youth Civics Initiative, which is just named after the town I live in.
Awesome. Thanks, Caroline. All right, Gint, we'll go to you next.
Hey everyone, it's a pleasure to be here today. I'm Gent Javiari. I'm a junior at UMass Dartmouth. My pronouns are he, him. I'm part of the class of 2025, and I'm a Newman Civic Fellow.
Awesome. And these are really impressive student civic leaders who have really impressive bios that you hopefully read when you register for this event. Morgan can also drop the link of the event in the chat so folks can read about these amazing students. But I'm so sorry. I also skipped over Deja. Deja, if you can hear me, we had some technical difficulties earlier. Deja, if you can hear me, come off mute and please introduce yourself as well. It looks like Deja may still have technical difficulties. All right, Deja, we'll come back to you as soon as you can hear me for that. But going to the Cynthia, Caroline, and Gint, one of the things I heard a lot today at George Washington University was the importance of having mentors and role models and sort of initiative experiences K through 12 or even younger to get you involved as a civic leader. And so I'm just curious just to start off and sort of offer you all the floor. Can you all just sort of tell us, what was your first memory of being sort of initiated or inspired to get involved in civic education or local civics as a youth? Was it an election or was it a different local initiative? What sort of inspired you to get involved as a young person? And Cynthia, maybe we'll go back and we'll start with you.
Right. Okay. So for some context, I'm from Miami, Florida. And I would have to say in my young activism career, my earliest memory has to be around the 2016 election. So as I am from Miami and I take very much pride in being a first gen Cuban American, there was a lot of misinformation and a lot of campaigns that were pushed against immigrants in my community. So that was really what called me to action to not only educate people on like immigration rights and human rights in that sense, but also teach immigrants their civic ability and like the power that they have. Because in the 2016 election, there's a lot of fear mongering. So bringing power back to the people is what got me really passionate about starting this kind of work. But yeah.
Awesome. And maybe Gint, we'll go to you next. What was your first memory? What was the thing that inspired you to get involved?
Yeah, so for me, it was a little bit different. I remember it was freshman year of high school. We had just gotten, like, high school had just started. It was September. And I remember I saw like a flyer that said, like, run for the student council elections. And I was already kind of interested in politics at that time. This was also, right, I think soon after the 2016 election. And I remember I was like, you know what, like, I want to run for president of my class. And so I remember I was walking around in the morning before the classes, talking to students, and obviously I wasn't used to it. I was trying to do my best, and I remember I was talking to my classes too. And it's not like my platform was anything special. It was really just like a lot of the freshmen were like, "Hey, we don't have any merch. Like all the other classes have merch. Can we get some merch?" Or things like I remember people were complaining about the air conditioning. And I was like, well, I don't know if I can fix that, but I can try. And, I remember that was part of my speech as well. So it was really cool to, run in that kind of election, first time ever doing it. And I would end up actually winning, which was honestly really, really cool. And from there, I got involved in a lot of different activities, but that was probably my first time getting involved in civics.
I love that. And who doesn't love a platform of free t-shirts and better air conditioning? I think that's a platform that I think a lot of Americans can agree on again. So, Caroline, I want to go to you. You do a lot of great civics work as well. I'm curious for yourself, what was sort of one of the first memories or sort of catalyst experiences for you to get involved?
I think it comes in like two different forms for me. So on one hand, I remember vividly that every time my mom would go vote, she would take me with her to the polling place. So I could always get like the little sticker, even though obviously as a child I wasn't participating in the election. But the first time that I saw that I could become like an active part was also in high school. And it was around probably my freshman or sophomore year. I saw like an ad for a Model UN club and I thought it looked like fun. And I just absolutely fell in love with that. And from there, it kind of transitioned into being more interested in domestic civics, so whether state or national level legislature. And I just really wanted to get engaged in that process and see what I could do. So really just growing from like your stereotypical like Model UN kid in high school, but seeing how that impacted me and wanting to help others have that experience.
I love that. That's great as well. Unfortunately, it looks like we are still having some technical difficulties with Deja, so I'm going to pass on Deja for now, but hopefully she'll get in the way and have some good signal in a second to join. So talking about sort of student civic leadership, I think a lot of times what sort of happens is that y'all get sort of framed as, you are college is a great time to learn to vote, but then you're the leaders of tomorrow. And what I've talked to each of you individually about and also collectively about is that you all are really doing leadership and change making today, specifically in your own communities. And so I'd love to sort of shift the conversation to now highlight some of those things and ask you more specific questions. And so again, I'm going to start with you on this one because one of the easy avenues that I think a lot of college students do have in terms of getting involved or letting their voice be heard on a micro level is actually through their student association or their student government or whatever sort of avenues of student voice that may exist on their institutional campus. And I know that you're currently the vice president of your class and your student association. So I'm just curious, can you speak to what do you see as the role of student governments or student associations in sort of preparing the next generation of elected civic leaders? And why do you think it's important for students to have that access to power and voice on campus?
Absolutely. So yeah, I've been on SGA for 3 years now in our student government at UMass Dartmouth, which that's my background right here. Awesome campus. And I think for me, in terms of preparing the next generation, it's really about like for me personally, I was able to for running in SGA and hearing other people run for student government. It's really about like learning what other students want, and I think it's actually really interesting. I always talk about a campus is pretty much like its own little city, your own little town, right? Which means which means that all the great things that happen, the struggles, the drama, like anything you'd think that would happen in a normal city, all happens on campus, right? And I think as an elected leader, if you're planning on doing something in the future, you end up becoming like responsible for these students. You got to represent their views. You learn that you have to take the wins with the losses, and that like at the end of the day, the buck stops with you if you're going to represent these students. And it really, I think, in my personal opinion, sets you up for if you want to become an elected leader in the future outside of your campus. But also, I think for the positive impact part of this question, I would say that for actually a big thing that happened last year, spring 2023, I got the chance to work with our MassPIRG organizer, and we co-wrote a resolution for hunger-free initiatives for like food insecurity on our campus. And it was basically, it passed through our SGA unanimously, and it asked for our state legislators to pass legislation that would include things like food insecurity education, points of contact, grant funding, support for like food pantries and stuff like that. And that was all in line with all the other UMasses that had done very similar things. And what was really cool is over that summer, this past summer, Governor Maura Healey actually ended up adding a $1 million line item for hunger-free initiatives in the state budget. And even though she didn't really talk about the role of UMasses in that, my headcanon is that like, because UMass Dartmouth also had a resolution like all the other UMasses, that suddenly, it's a big deal. Students are talking about it, and that she kind of took that and would end up, adding it. So that's kind of my headcanon. But yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the positive impact, and it really all comes together. I think if you get involved, and change can happen. And that is, I think I've seen proof of it, and both on my campus and on other campuses.
Awesome. Again, that's a great example. And I love how you sort of tied into both of it. It's not only like a learning ground for you as a leader of what it means to build coalitions and sort of be in the mess of civics and politics on a micro level, but also actually moving and making change, and you all pushing your own campus, but also the whole state of Massachusetts to move forward and center student basic needs. That's really incredible. I'm super glad Deja is able to hopefully join us as well. Deja is doing us a huge favor and giving some of the spring break to us. So Deja is currently in transit. But Deja, I'm going to give the floor to you a little bit just to introduce yourself, to tell everyone your name, what year, your university, and a little bit of your ties to Campus Compact, and then I'll kick the next question to you, Deja.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. And I apologize for my delay due to some technical issues. But as was said, my name is Deja Bandy. I go by the pronoun she, her. I represent the George Washington University in DC. I'm currently a graduating senior that will graduate in May with a degree in international affairs and journalism. And I'm affiliated with the Campus Compost Compact as a Newman Fellow for George Washington University. And I would say I got started with getting involved with civic education. The first memory that I can pinpoint to was during high school. I went to apply to get my rights to vote, fill out the voters' rights so I can go and be registered. And I never got my voters registration card. And so I said, Mom, what's going on? Maybe I should reach out. And they said that I never had a completed application. So I completed one the second time. And after that second time, they said I was ineligible due to my birthday. However, I was given guidance that I can pre-register in the state of Virginia right before my birthday, before turning 18, just a few months before. And so through that, I applied the third time after my birthday, and I was finally able to officially vote in Virginia. In that process, I think because it was a lot of barriers and I understood the importance of voting because it's essential to our democratic governance, overall citizen participation, and really upholding many principles that are at the foundations of our governance system and country that I think was the segue into my passion for civic education and getting involved with the community and my current role as an ANC commissioner that we'll talk a bit more briefly later today.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Daisha, for that. And I love that, just like warms my heart. I'm sure a lot of people's heart to see like you tried to register 3 times as a high school student. I will think many of us would love just to have anyone who wants to try to register once, much less stick with it and maintain through the hurdles. That's wonderful, Daisha. And yes, I'm going to come back to you in a second as well. But I want to now kick it to you, Caroline, because you're doing some really interesting work. You mentioned this briefly about your sort of your Oxford Lafayette Youth Civics Initiative in Mississippi. But just talk to me a little bit about, what inspired you through this initiative to want to work with local high school students and teach them civics? Like, what inspired you as a college student to really want to make sure that civics are also taught to the next generation below you? So can you just tell us a little bit about your project and sort of what inspired you to get going and decide to take leadership as a college student now in that area?
Yes, definitely. So I entered college in 2020, so during the 2020 elections. And one of the biggest things for me is that I wanted to help people register to vote because I thought it was one of like the most fundamental things I could do on campus. And I've continued that work throughout my 4 years in college. And one of the things I've noticed working with these organizations is that the sooner students get involved, the more opportunities they have to create lasting change and lasting infrastructure around different initiatives on campus. And sort of around my sophomore and junior year, I was reflecting on what had motivated me to do that. And I saw that a lot of it was because of what I had been involved in high school. So because I was in Model UN, and because I was in like our state's mock youth legislature, I understood where my role was, like how I wanted to affect change and how important it was to be involved in these initiatives. And it's not just like learning the ins and outs of like how these systems work, it's the skills you build up around it. So learning how to navigate in your community, learning how to organize with other people, learning how to effectively communicate your ideas, whether it's speech and debate or whether it's like just more informal conversations you'll have with your peers. And I'm very thankful for the people that I had around me in high school who were able to facilitate these programs. And because Mississippi has so many areas that are rural and don't have the same infrastructures as where I grew up, I knew that was something that we are lacking in our state. And that coupled with the fact that a lot of civic education in Mississippi and in most states is very, very academically focused. You learn what happened after the Revolutionary War, you learn the laws are this, the constitutions are this. You don't see how that applies to your actual home community. So what I kind of want to do, and with Campus Compact's support, I have started a program for high school students in our local area where they have a space to kind of come together and talk to each other about what exactly is civics? What does that mean where I live? How am I engaged in civics even if I don't see it? Because civics is more than, oh, I went and voted. It's, I participate in these organizations around me. I talk to people in these capacities. I know these people, and this is how we network to create change in our community. So that's what I really wanted to share with high school students. And I think high school is a really important age to kind of get people interested in this because one, you're kind of coming into your own as like your fully formed adult self. You're about to go to college or you're about to go on to your career or whatever your next steps in life are. So you need to be prepared for how to become civically engaged, even if you're in a different community or even if you're just in a different place in your community. And then lastly, you're building up to the age of 18. And statistics show that the earlier you register to vote, the more likely you are to continue that throughout your life. So we want to get students, high school students, college students, any member of the community involved in that as soon as possible. So that was really important to me. And then the thing that's been really great with Campus Compact's support is that a lot of our state history is centered around our capital city of Jackson. So that's about 2.5 hours away from where I live in Oxford, Mississippi. So I wanted to give students the opportunity to go to Jackson, to meet with their state legislatures, to see the history around them, to see the history of civil rights that exists in Mississippi, because Mississippi has a very long and complicated history that's really important for high school students to engage with. So that's kind of what motivated me to get involved with this.
Awesome, Caroline. I love that so much. I love the fact that you sort of talked about your own experiences, both co-curricularly and curricularly as a high school student, is sort of what it sort of inspired you. And I think that as a talk earlier today, where some research from Circle and sort of showed like the student agency and the ability to actually see change or affect change on whatever level, and voting were very highly correlated together. And I love that you decided, you know what, I want to create that for other youth as well in this state. And what does this look like? And how do we move from just like a textbook concept to something really reality around how they have power? That's just really excellent. And we'll love to hear more about that later as well. All right, Cynthia, I want to sort of go to you a little bit because you have a unique experience. As we talked about earlier, and we know in depth, you are very proud to be from Miami. You went to Miami-Dade College as well, and then before you went to Brown. But you have a lot of experiences as sort of, you got involved in this as sort of as a community activist. This sort of was your entry point. So I'm just curious, tell us a little bit more about, what shaped you as a community activist to want to get involved in sort of the political or the civics element of it. But also, I'm curious from your experience going from, a community college in the Florida area to now a private Ivy League in the Northeast. What are some sort of differences you're seeing in terms of civic access or education between both, or maybe what similarities you're seeing as well? So, Cynthia, I'll just pass the floor to you.
Yeah, that's such a great question. So, okay, let's start. So, as I mentioned before, I got into grassrooting and the idea of civic education around 2016. So I was around like sixth, seventh grade. But I didn't really get into it with working with organizations until ninth grade or like 10th grade. And being a young first gen low income student in Miami, um, made me feel so powerless in so many ways. And unfortunately, that carried on to me when it came to my experience in Miami-Dade, which I'm still very proud that I came from Miami-Dade College because it built the foundation for who I am. And I love my hometown and I hope to bring back everything I learned from Brown to build my community stronger. But when you're in a place where no one takes your voice serious, it's very disheartening. I was very, very fortunate that around my junior, senior year of high school, I was able to work in programs such as Civic University, which they have an amazing student like design fellowship of their own, where they connect high school students with like networking abilities so you can address a community like issue, like so you can work on it. So that was one of my first real experiences where my voice mattered. So like an adult asked me my opinion and they wrote it down. I was like, oh, you're taking me serious. And it's one of those moments where once you feel like your voice means something, it drives you so much more to want to do more things in your community, volunteering, put more time into it, because suddenly your time, your words, your actions are so much more fundamental to the community that brings you back home. So as I transitioned to Miami-Dade College, so I did a dual enrollment program. And in Miami-Dade College, when we would talk about civic literacy, it was very confined to just voting access. But even then with voting access, you would think that in Miami-Dade College, there'd be more resources for like first gen immigrant experiences. And unfortunately, it wasn't there as much as it should have been, especially for very critical elections such as the 2020 election, where our rights are very much on the line. So in that experience, it was very much where you're in an environment where, you know, not everyone has the privilege to be civically engaged. And I think that's a tough pill for a lot of people to swallow, where some people, especially students in Miami-Dade College, are just trying to get a degree, to get a job, to survive. And not a lot of people have the opportunity to just really focus on like civic engagement and grassrooting, because it does take a lot of interning and volunteering, a lot of unpaid labor that sometimes, if without the right programs, is not seen as important. Um, and although I'm so privileged to be at Brown now, it is so like eye-opening how different a world is here, where we have an entire house set on civic engagement and civic learning. Like that's where I am right now at the Swear Center at Brown, where every conversation is about how do we fix Providence high schools? How do we stop the dropout rate? How do we educate students to get involved? How do we empower POC students and Indigenous voices? How do we make diversity in what we say, or how do we bring back power to the youth? And even then, like I walk into the room with professors who, in the grand scheme of things, I'm like 12 compared to their experience, yet they sit and they talk to me and they take my ideas into account. And we have entire fellowships or little internships built on just getting students involved and having our own fresh eyes and ears on campaigns to really bring things back home. Um, so those are like the main differences I've seen. It's just a different culture of like acceptance where, even they like we're in a higher place of privilege, where most people here are in a private institution where they don't really have to worry about going back home and just trying to make ends meet. So yeah, so I don't know, within this privilege, I just been able to see a lot more of the nuances of like systemic, the intersections. So, hopefully to bring it back home to Miami.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Deja, for that. For Cynthia for that. Deja is messaging me, also trying to get back to Signal as well. So hopefully we'll want to talk a little bit about her experience as an elected official. But for now, we'll keep it moving for you all. Morgan also kindly reminded me that we are going to start now opening it up to all the panelists, but also want to give you all as attendees a chance to ask questions as well. So if you do have a question, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you use your Q&A feature at the bottom, we'll make sure we highlight some of your questions at the end as well for that. Okay, so what I'm going to move to now, and this is sort of for anyone, and we can tackle this, but I feel like we talk about this a lot. There's a lot of sometimes I think myths about your generation of like young civic change makers. There's a lot of things that are like, if it's not on TikTok, then they're not going to watch, they're not going to be educated about it. They don't even know what elections are going on locally. How do we much less get them to register to vote? So I'm just curious for you all, what is sort of one myth that you think is out there about sort of your generation as student civic leaders that is false and needs to be corrected, or is not true from your experience, from what you're seeing on your college campuses? And so for this one, I'll just sort of open it up and maybe, Ginth, maybe let's go back to you if you have a first initial response of what's one myth you wish was out there that could be corrected?
Yeah, I think one myth that I've seen, especially being involved in student government on campus, is that people say that students and young people just in general, they don't want to be involved in politics. They don't like politics, right? And I think that that's not exactly correct. I think students want to be involved, but the life that young people find themselves in today, I mean, I think everybody here can agree, is just really hectic, and there's so many added pressures, responsibilities. And I think if you're a politician or something like that, or someone that's a leader on campus, you need to find a way to cater the conversation around the specific things that the students want to be involved in or that they care about. And I think for me, having to continuously try and be elected and really go through this process, you got to put yourself in outside of your comfort zone. You got to ask what you can improve on, and I feel like that's not something that we see a lot. Is like making yourself vulnerable and say, what do you think we could be doing better? Where can we improve at? Like, where are we going wrong? Asking questions like those, but also trying to become more like create a more personal bond with them, right? And talking to them about like their classes or maybe where their hometown or things like that. And I think that's just the conversations that aren't happening enough. It's really just about like it's really, I think it gets really degrading sometimes for students to hear like why they're not doing enough or things like that, and you just got to become more like create a more personal bond, and also just put yourself in a vulnerable situation where they can actually feel like their voices are heard and that their thoughts matter.
I love that. And I love that. Cynthia, Caroline, do you want to build off of that, of what Gen said? What's a myth you feel like is out there you feel like should be corrected about young student civic leaders or your generation?
I think there's a myth in general, and I'm not going to say this is specific to our generation. I think this is one of those concurrent things that keeps happening, is that the youngest generation is apathetic or doesn't want to participate because they find it unimportant. And I think now we're seeing a really big change in that because our university, like a number of universities, get NSOLV data, which is related to like student participation in elections. And we're seeing that younger generations are turning out more than the previous generations. So we're seeing students are interested. We're seeing students are interested in advocating in like alternative ways. So maybe using social media more than previous generations. So I think this concept that our generation doesn't want to participate or thinks it's unimportant is a really big myth. And I think as soon as we can kind of overcome that, we can see more collective, like working towards change. Because right now it's causing odds between different generational groups, which I think is manifesting itself most in elections.
Love that. I love both of those things. I think you're both absolutely right. I think, again, going to what you said earlier, I was listening to a panel earlier today, and they said, sometimes civics is about the courage and the vulnerability of being wrong or changing your own opinion. But how often we rarely see that from our own elected officials or our community leaders or even our teachers doing that as well. But then, Caroline, I love the part around actually the idea that we're apathetic is not true. That it's not our apathy, but actually our access that matters, or our efficacy, the ability to feel like our own agency matters. But looking at Gen Z specifically, when you have agency and you know what you're doing, you all do turn out in remarkable numbers. All right, so we're going to try to actually let Deja, I think Deja's joining us via phone. So we're going to try to see if this works real quick. Though Deja is not able to hop on the panelist. So Deja, I'm going to try to unmute you to see if you can talk a little bit. But Deja, would love to hear, you have a unique experience of being an elected official. So if you would tell folks about like what is the sort of the ANC model, the Advisory Neighborhood Commission in Washington, D.C., and why did you choose to sort of run for office as a young change maker?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. Can you all hear me well?
Yeah, you're
Oh,
great.
fantastic. Okay. So the ANC is part of the local government in DC. Given that DC is not a state, it's a district, the governance operates a little different. So starting from the top down, you have the mayor, and under the mayor, you have our council members for each ward. We make up the wards. At GW, we reside within Ward 2. So our council member is Council Member Pinto. And then from there, you have your advisory neighborhood commissions. And there's commissions labeled in numbers and letters. So within Ward 2, we then have A. So that's what makes up my commission, 2A. And then from there, it gets broken down into single member districts where each person represents no more than 2,000 people. So I represent the eastern portion of Foggy Bottom, which is called 2807. For those that are familiar with George Washington University campus, it stretches from South Hall, a dormitory, down to the White House. So I represent constituents that are GW students, that are non-students that reside in nearby apartments. Theoretically, Joe Biden and his family, if they chose to take upon residency in DC, as well as other neighbors that come and go and are unhoused neighbors within the neighborhood. And so through this role, I essentially serve as a liaison, an elected body to advocate on local issues such as recreational education, policy initiatives that are currently going under consideration for council members in my role. And I took upon this role because through the Nashman Center that is at GW, it's our Center for Civic Engagement and Community Involvement. And I took several classes that were community engaged courses that exposed me to the DC governance process. And then I connected with alumni at GW that have had experiences with the ANC. I was already volunteering and actively going to meetings. And my classmates, as well as other alumni at GW, encouraged me to campaign and run. And I said, I don't think this is realistic. I'm a college student. That's just unbelievable. I can't imagine that. And so I took their guidance, I took their advice, and with goodwill, We started our campaign in November, and I had the opportunity to serve and will conclude my term in December of this year.
That's awesome, Deja. And that's a really great sort of explanation of what you do. And sort of, I love how you sort of took it from being involved and talk about your origin story, but then sort of taking courses and communication courses from the Hunting National Center at GW, and then sort of be inspired and like, well, maybe like, can I do that? And like, well, okay, let's try. And I also love that you're now low key one of the few elected officials that if he were to be a regular citizen, Joe Biden would be able to complain to you about things about a local neighborhood. So that's an exciting thing to know and good to know to keep in mind. But going to that, I'm sort of going to go to our next question, which I think is sort of the focus of today's conversation as well. And that's sort of the importance of like really making sure that student leaders like yourself are trusted and given the agency and the opportunity in civic spaces to lead and not just wait for tomorrow, but actually lead today. And so, Cynthia, I'm going to sort of go to you for this one. I want you to sort of start us off, and then maybe with Deja, you can hop in as well. But why do you think it's important for student leaders like yourself to be trusted to lead in civic spaces today and not be merely told that you're the leaders of tomorrow?
Um, quite simply, if not now, then when? Especially if we are truly the leaders of tomorrow, why not give us the careful intern or like the agency to start learning our skills so we can start building representation for the youth that we represent. I think it's oftentimes we forget that when you look at the population, there's a lot more youth, and we have ways of connecting with each other. We have social media with online college campuses, and that's such a rich lived experience that unfortunately most politicians or our so-called leaders don't really have. So it comes to a point that they're representing the past versus being adamant on like representing the current future and their current people.
I love that. I love that. If not now, yeah, when? And I love that. And I love you're absolutely right. Of just sort of like we are also part of your constituency. We are part of the community as well. Deja, what about you? I'm sort of curious. Again, you have the experience of having gone for this as a student, and oftentimes they say, "Wait your turn, run for office later on." And you said, "No, I'm going to do this now." Why do you think it's important for students to have the space and the agency and the trust to be leading in civic spaces now?
Absolutely. I mean, I absolutely second everything that Cynthia said. But it also, again, very similar to that response. By leading by, you set an example when you lead. And I think it also provides students who are going to be the future that opportunity to make mistakes, not only make mistakes, but to learn. And without that firsthand learning, we don't know where we will be. Um, and
Oh, Deja may have had a little another technical announcement within that. Deja, I'll let you come hop on whenever you can as well. But Caroline, again, I wanted to give you also a space. Do you want to hop in and sort of say what from your experience, why do you think this is so important in terms of why giving students agency to lead now is so vital? And maybe we'll go to Gint and then Caroline.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason why it is really vital at the end of the day is because if the goal is to improve our civic spaces and progress and get things done, then you need to allow the folks that are around the people who are going to use these spaces the most to lead those initiatives, right? As a student, if I'm talking to a campus administrator or something, right? It's just kind of natural that the administrator is not going to be around as many students as I am, right? They're not going to have the same conversations. And that's just kind of part of the difference between us. And so it's really just about pushing, students that are at the forefront of this, that are talking to the students, they're going to be around these spaces the most to lead those spaces, because that's the only way we can progress, efficiently, effectively, and actually get to whatever the initiative is, as great as possible.
Love that. Caroline, do you have anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I just kind of want to reiterate what everybody's saying is that the younger generations, I think we understand as a society that it's important to empower younger generations to speak on their issues, but there's a disconnect in like actually doing that. So as soon as we allow these like young leaders and student leaders into spaces, we're going to get more dynamic solutions to the problems we face as a whole, because we're understanding things from different vantage points, whether it's cultural vantage points, whether it's like age or culture related things like that. The more you have, more dynamic spaces you have, and the more you empower student leaders and young leaders to be engaged in issues, the more productive you will be in finding solutions.
I love that. This is all great. Deja, I'm gonna go back to you. If you can unmute, do you want to finish your thought as well? If you can't, it's perfectly okay. We can keep going. All right, I'm gonna take that as Deja is still in a place where she can't unmute right now, but Deja will come back.
Yes,
Oh, you good? Okay,
I
go ahead,
can't
Deja.
unmute. I apologize, but again,
You're
I
good.
echo everyone else, and I think everyone completed my thoughts.
Okay, awesome. All right, so this is just a friendly reminder as well. If you are still with us on this really engaging call from our student civic leaders, we're going to open it up to Q&As from you all in a little while. If you can, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Morgan is sort of filtering through the questions as well, and we'll ask a couple of those in a second. I've got a couple more questions, though, quickly for our panelists, and then we'll open it up to you all. So the first one is sort of a fun one, and we sort of talked about this a little bit. I prepared you all for this, so I hope you are maybe your administrators are listening. Who knows? But this is sort of the dream question, that if you all were in power at your different institutions, your universities, right, and you had sort of endless resources and influence, and there was one change you can make on your college campus, you think, to improve civic education and civic engagement activation on your campus, I'm curious, what would you do? If you could make one change, if you were in charge and you had endless resources and opportunities, what's the one change you would make on your specific college campus to increase the levels of civic engagement, civic education, and civic activation? I'm going to go first to Deja. We'll go to you first, and then we'll go to Caroline.
Absolutely. This is, like you said, the dream question. And if we had endless resources and influence, I would love to have a required course that every student at my campus has to take. This was an initiative that I did start my sophomore year at George Washington, where we wanted a diversity requirement where all students were required to take a course on diversity, inclusion, and equity, and everything that comes into that conversation. And so I think having that alongside civic education, the importance to vote, and again, everything in that whole realm of conversation is, I think, critical for the future leaders of today, and not our leaders for tomorrow, because we can make change now. We don't have to make change in the next 5 days.
I love that. That's great. Caroline, we'll go to you.
I think one of the biggest changes I would make is that I would want us to have election day either as an asynchronous day of learning or as a holiday. Mississippi has a lot of barriers to voting, especially for college students. And I think taking that step both allows more students to vote and is also a symbolic step to say that we value civic education on our campus.
I love that. Small but powerful. Very, very good. Cynthia, how about you? What would you do? What would you do at Brown? What would, if you could do one thing?
If I can do one thing, and this is very similar to Deja's answer, but I would have, if I had ultimate like influence, I
Yeah.
would definitely make it a point to correlate the intersections of all these different majors from like STEM to medical and connect it back to civic engagement. Because I think for most students, they think that unless you're like a political science major, you can't care about civic engagement or communication. And one thing cool that they do in the poli sci department here that I would love to see implemented in other majors and other disciplines is they have CBRL courses. So they're courses that they kind of force you to work in the community of Providence to do like civic engagement. So for example, in my anthropology of homelessness class, I actively help I actively work and help individual unhoused individuals like apply for housing as my way of like civically engage in learning. And I think if more people were able to see the intersection between a CS degree and seeing how they can still include diversity, inclusion, and make the world a better place through their majors, we would have such more civically engaged citizens. Because then they were all citizens, regardless of what your passions are. And I think if we made that more accessible to students and gave them the bigger picture, we could just have such a more responsive country.
Love that. That's awesome. All right, again, going to you as well. Imagining you're the president, not just the SGA. What would you do over at UMass Dartmouth?
Well, first I have to say I have to say that the rest of the panelists, I mean, these are some awesome answers. I don't know if I can top any of these answers, but I think I'm going to go a more fun, like a fun direction here. I remember, I believe, Caroline, you mentioned that you were in Malta UN in high school, and I'm also in Malta UN in my college. And actually, we are able to attend conferences every single year where just any student can, any student that's a part of the club that gets, selected to go to these conferences, they, get to, really represent what it really means to be part of the UN from a student's perspective. And I think I would love to have more of these conferences. It's a really fun way to just, be involved and I think get a chance to get a glimpse of what it means to be a change maker, and that what we're seeing from real life politicians and things like that. So more of these conferences where we can bring more students, like as many students as possible for as many majors as possible, just to get a glimpse and also represent their their countries, right? Because we have all these different countries and all these students that come to campus. They could all represent different countries and things like that. So I think that's a fun way to get people civically involved.
I love it. These are wonderful, wonderful ideas and answers, and hopefully from your all's mouths to your administrators and funders' ears for these. But I love that all these also are very tangible ideas, the things that are very much possible and have been modeled at various campuses, and are things that at Campus Compact we're also trying to uplift these innovative models, whether it be having a democracy day or an election day, or having more CBR courses to help students see the pathways between their major and what does civic engagement or civic responsibility look like, or even having more conferences or even required courses and for entry-level students or seniors before they graduate. Those are all wonderful things. All right, so we have some great questions from the attendees I want to get to. So I'm going to ask a couple of these, and then I'll give you all the final word here in a little bit. But one of the first questions I think is actually a good one. We have a couple questions that are sort of similar, and there are a lot of actually administrators on this call. I mean, there are staff, there are faculty sort of listening to this, and they were intrigued by this. And I'm just curious if you all had advice for us older folks around wanting to work alongside students who are leading and have this desire, this passion. What would you sort of give us in terms of what can we do to better support you all as the civic leaders of today, and not necessarily get in your way, but help allow you to feel supported within this? So what advice would you give for the staff, faculty, or administrators on this call if they're looking to say, hey, I want to do a better job supporting and centering your voice? What would that look like? And for this one, I'll sort of open up to the floor. Anyone can start for this one.
I can start if anything. So I think even just asking the question is such an incredible first step to making sure that you're supporting the civic leaders in your space. But I think ultimately, when we're having these conversations, in no way are we, and I don't want to speak for the other fellow panelists, but in no way are we saying that we're experts in grassrooting or civic engagement. We just want the ability to lead and take agency and to build those fundamental skills so that we can further create a cycle of generational knowledge. And I think the best way for educators to really is just to provide a guiding mentor. Like in a day, we're not going to know everything. But as long as you're not overpowering conversations, or when you have your your engaging leaders, you're asking them like, what have you noticed in the community, and what do you think you would have wanted to see growing up this, and really emphasizing the power of a lived experience. Especially like we all know the power that comes with education, and I'm so blessed to be here, but there's some things that Brown can never teach me because it's just something that I carried with me in my lived experience living in Miami and just seeing things with my own two eyes. And as much as we say that, we also, as civic leaders, very much value faculty and staff who have their own lived experiences. And that's just something that if you share openly, we can engage and further collaborate. That's just going to make us better leaders in the future. So I think just overall, just not overpowering the conversation, but don't be afraid to guide us, give us advice, and like allowing us to make these decisions and have that agency.
I love that. Deja, I see you raise your hand. You want to come off mute and give some thoughts?
Yes, I think the first key to it is to be patient with us. I think sometimes students in these spaces and roles are very quick to lead, or they sometimes feel as though they have the answers to everything. And so being patient with us for us to realize that we're going to make errors, we're going to make mistakes. And I think patience is key. But also, I think outside of that and looking at it more in terms of academic institutions, which is where we are all coming from different schools throughout the country, is not just bringing students to those spaces and to those rooms where we're able to provide feedback and have space for involvement, but allow us to also be that decision maker. So when you have a committee, when you have a board, ensure that there's not just one student representative, but multiple student representatives that has voting power to make decisions in those spaces. I think a great example that our university does a great job at doing that is for Black History Month. Black students are able to come together, and any other students that would like to take part in planning some of the activities, but more specifically the keynote events. We get to look for the keynote speaker. We select the keynote speaker. We manage a budget. And so not just going out to students and doing a survey and saying, hey, who would you like to be the speaker or the keynote to lead our celebrations for this month, but actively having them make the decision on who that person's going to be, do the work and the research, or who's going to sit in that role. And then also there is also spaces where my university doesn't do a great job at that. I think more recently, people can look at our school moniker. We just changed our names to, I believe, the Revolutionaries, if I'm correct. And I think students feel like they didn't have an opportunity to make the decision whether that was going to be the case or not, versus just being engaged and involved with surveyship and sharing their voice. But again, having that role, just vote and say yes or no, is powerful.
I love that. I love the idea of like not just having one of us at the decision-making table, but also give us the agency that our vote actually matter and mean something as well within that. Those are excellent answers. All right, so Caroline, again, I'm gonna go to you all for this next one because I think it's really interesting because you all are coming from, literally different ends of the spectrum of the country, but also literally different ends of the spectrum politically of the country. Attendees has, I don't know why that's going on, but we're going to keep rolling. But one of the questions that one of the attendees asked is, how do you all as student civic leaders sort of navigate divisive rhetoric and stay politically engaged yourself? Again, you mentioned earlier when you're on SGA, like sometimes you have to be in the messiness of it and you have people who disagree on things. So how do you all personally, and Caroline and you in Mississippi, like how do you sort of stay engaged in those sort of divisive rhetoric moments that are happening so much on social media or nationally, but how do you stay engaged locally, even in sitting in some of those tough conversations with people you may not agree with? Again, why don't we go with you first, and then we'll go to Caroline.
I mean, this is it's admittedly a tough question, and I think I think this is always gonna be a struggle. And I think as a student, the way that, and I think this is what we learn in our classes too, is like if you don't know something or if you don't know all the information, it's okay to admit that you don't know everything. And I think sometimes we may try to want to answer, every single kind of jab that people send us or question that people ask that's like a little divisive. But really, like, I think sometimes it's better to just say, you don't know all the information, you don't know all the facts. And actually, I think that can create a culture of admitting that, like, we don't know all the facts. Like, we're not going to go towards fake news or something like that to create facts or something like that, right? I think a lot of people sometimes end up trying to create an answer that isn't fully established or fully correct, or they don't know all about it. But I think if you create this system and this culture of saying, you don't know all the facts, you don't know all the answers, so you're not going to answer it until you know that. I think it will help with this kind of rhetoric and this divisiveness, and it will encourage other students to go educate themselves. And also, one thing that I've tried to do within different groups of friends and things like that is like, hey, let's go fact check things, right? Like, let's go give me something that, like, I'll ask a friend or something. Give me a thought or give me something controversial that you maybe have seen on the news or on TikTok or something that you believe. And then we'll go fact check it, right? And figure out if this is actually the case or not. And on multiple occasions, we've fact checked it and completely found that it was totally wrong, right? So I think, again, if you just encourage this kind of culture on your campus and, within your friends and even people that you don't know, I think it will help and improve the entire campus.
Love that. Caroline, how about you? How do you sort of stay in the messy middle of all of this and the divisive rhetoric that you may be seeing in Mississippi?
I think what's important, kind of like Jen mentioned, is to foster a place where you can have productive conversations, which can be really hard. And with that, it's important to have spaces where students don't feel comfortable or don't feel safe, to have a space for them to kind of address that issue with their peers. But I think one of the most important things is not to shy away from uncomfortable topics out of fear of political opposition or kind of conflict. And I think sometimes universities kind of tend towards this could be divisive on campus or this could cause issues somewhere along the line. So we don't want to talk about it all because those conversations are going to happen somewhere. So you can either have them in a place where you can have the ability to moderate and fact check and produce productive conversations, or you can just leave them where they're going to fester and become larger points of contention among your students. And I mean, the university, I think, can play a unique role here. So like one thing I will mention, just bringing it back to voting engagement, is that when I do voting engagement stuff on campus, because of the organizations I work with, I am nonpartisan. Always will have somebody say something about one candidate or the other when you're doing something. I've had people roll their eyes at me trying to register people to vote. You get all sorts of reactions, but just kind of maintaining the importance of what you're doing. And for every person who says something or is vitriolic or hateful, you have 2 or 3 other people who are encouraged, or they want to get involved, or they think it's important, and you're opening avenues for people to get engaged in things they think are important. So navigating divisive rhetoric is difficult, but it's really important for us to do. And it's important to kind of keep your values, but be adaptable to changing what you think or to kind of adjusting how you talk with people. Because some of the issues come in not just from having differences of opinions or views, but in how you present them. And I think the more we can kind of work together to form like productive conversations, the more we can kind of navigate these spaces.
Love that. I think that's a really great example. I love your point around, Caroline, it's not a matter of if we're going to have this conversation that's divisive, it's just where is it going to happen. But I love your point too, again, around there's a lot of sort of things like college students today, do they know what misinformation is or disinformation, and can they actually do that? And you're saying like, actually, yes, like we want to know, we investigate things and do research and want to sort of dive deeper. I think y'all are excellent models of how to handle that. Okay, so we're running out of time, so I'm gonna give you all this final last question. And it's sort of like it's sort of the future one. It's sort of the big one and the hope one. But someone wants to know, going forward, what do you hope your generation of college change makers, of college civic leaders, accomplish in terms of protecting or expanding civic learning and civic education going forward? What do you all want your legacy to be as student civic change makers? And this can be broadly for your generation or specifically for you and your campus. So that's a big one. I'll give you a second to think about it. And then whenever we're ready, I think Deja will start with you on this one. What do you hope your legacy will be, or what your generation will be known for in terms of civics? Oh, Deja, if you can hear me, you're still on mute. If you can't, I'll go to someone else as well. All right, I'm gonna assume Deja may still have technical things. Cynthia, we'll go to you. What do you hope your generation is known for in terms of your civic legacy?
Yeah, so I think the two things, if I may, two things I would really want my generation to be known for is one of action. So not being confined by social media activism, but rather using that as a tool to fuel action in the community and making sure that you're really targeting the people you want to help. And two, this is a really big one for me. I hope my generation really pushes for intersectional justice. And when it comes to policy, when it comes to community action, we're taking apart individuals by all their identities and not being so quick to just write off like your lived experience, but really just targeting the structural violence, the harm that people go through day to day to make the community or make the world a better place.
I love that. I love that. Be known for action and be known for our full interdependent intersectional civic agent selves. That's great. Caroline, how about you? What is sort of your hope in terms of for your generation, what you all will be known for?
I think one thing I want to see change, and one thing we're already working on, is making civic spaces something for everyone. So, like Cynthia said, increasing intersectional discussions in policies and not just limiting it to one group of people, but then also making it something more approachable for everybody. So you don't kind of breaking down those barriers we see where it's like everything has to be highly formalized and structured, and there's no place for change unless you work up through certain political systems.
I love that. I love that. Civic spaces for everybody, where you're expanding the table, making it longer, not building walls to civic action or civic agency. That's incredible. All right, again, what about you? What's your hope?
My hope, I think, is to have a greater integration with education, civic learning and education. People, we've already mentioned, classes and things like that, but I also think finding ways to integrate it into our studies as well. So obviously political science majors are probably going to be handling stuff like that the most, but it doesn't mean that other majors can't also take on things that can integrate within their studies. And I would love to see more of the young generation pushing their administrators and their campuses to finding ways that they can integrate whatever they're doing in these civic spaces in their neighborhoods and their communities into what they're learning. And like maybe sometime in the future, who knows, maybe people can take a whole semester or a whole year's worth of classes or something like that, but or rather credits through doing something in their community. I think that probably is already a program in some places, but I would love to see that be integrated within like across the country or something like that, because it just encourages students to go out there and work and really get in the field and talk to people and just be civically engaged while also continuing their studies.
I love that. Promoting and expanding community-based learning and engagement. That's wonderful as well. I also should preface that we did not pay any of these panelists to say these answers, even though these are exactly what I was hoping they'd say. All right, last but not least, Deja, we'll go to you. What's your hope for your generation?
I think my hope for our generation is for us to leave a legacy and a mark for being known for mobilization and the expansion of civic education. And I say mobilization in terms of, I think going back to this key topic a little bit that I think has been a subtopic of voting. I think a key myth that I think is associated with Gen Z and our generation is that we don't vote. When, however, I think it might have been in 2018 that there was a study showing that our turnout in terms of youth for congressional midterms was double the historical average. So I think just this whole idea of us making collective change and coming together and mobilizing people to do that physically is probably the first step to making change that I think is important. And then in terms of expanding it, I think we've all talked about this, including it in coursework, including it in extracurriculars. And I think outside of, I think, the collegiate space, but I think having collegiate students and scholars bring this to other communities that don't have the privilege that we have of going to get our education, whether it be a 2-year institution, a 4-year institution, a trade school. There are people that don't have the opportunity to go to these spaces and have these conversations. So curating a space for people to have these conversations outside of college spaces for other people in our community. Because I think I remember hearing the statistics a while ago that about 56, maybe 50% of people in the US don't know all 3 branches of the government. So I think going back to this critical understanding of education and the fundamentals of civics and civics education, the importance of it is what I think I want our generation to be known for, to be progressing and expanding.
I love that. That's a great note to end on. The hope for the continued mobilization and expansion of civic leadership, civic agency, not only for you all as college students at 2-year or 4-year institutions, but for everyone in our community. I think it's a great note to end on. Well, thank you so much, again, Caroline, Cynthia, and Deja, for being a part of this and for lending your voices. It truly is a space where I feel like I learned a lot, and I know each of you and have been in conversation, but all of your brilliance and your expertise was really brought forth today and centered today. And I hope it's a continued invitation for it to create more spaces like this where you all are seen as the civic leaders that you are today and not just tomorrow. Thank you so much to everyone who attended today's workshop. We are going to follow up with you. And if Cynthia, Caroline, Gent, and Deja give me permission, I will share their contact information, an email. So if you have awesome other follow-up conversations or you want to bring them to come speak to some of your students or faculty, staff, or administrators, I'm sure they'd be willing to do that. But thank you all so much for this. Thank you so much for being a part of Civic Learning Week. And wherever you are, we hope you find new ways to get engaged with your community in civics and beyond. So thank you all so much for being a part of this, and we hope you have a great rest of your evening. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.